And there you go, the recording is in progress. I will like to say a few words at the outset, if I may. Firstly, my name is Jonathan Prentice. I'm the head of the Secretariat of the United Nations Network on Migration, and it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this meeting today. And I would like at this stage to wish everyone a happy and healthy 2022, and we look forward to collaborating with you all in the months to come. There are an immense number of participants already on the line. Many more have registered, and we expect this number to grow during it. I think highlighting the global nature of this endeavour, as well as not just the whole of government, but the whole of society approaches. Today's meeting is the first of 4 dialogues in advance of the roundtables in the International Migration Review Forum. The second of the 4 will be hosted next week on the 26th of January, and in the chat box we will share details for that with you in case you have not already received them or have not had the opportunity to register. The aim of the meeting today, and indeed all 4 of these meetings, is, as I said, to prepare all participants for the roundtable component of the International Migration Review Forum, which will be held in May in New York. To that end, the discussions today and the note that you have before you to help frame the discussions will feed into the briefing notes that the Network on Migration will prepare in advance of the roundtable discussions themselves. We hope also through these dialogues, including today's, to elicit and encourage pledges from member states, stakeholders, and indeed from the UN system as to how they can contribute in concrete ways to further implementation of the Global Compact for self-orderly and regular migration. And we also hope that today's discussion will tease out some of the best practices that do exist encouragingly around the world that can feed into our global repository that forms part of the Migration Network Hub as mandated by the Global Compact itself. We are, of course, but I must impress upon you, extremely keen for this meeting to be interactive. The benefits of it will come from hearing the broadest array of views. But I see there are already over 300 participants. For this to be interactive, it requires immense discipline on the part of all those intervening to keep to the time, to keep their comments to the point and as concise as possible. We will, on the part of the network, be maintaining a prospective speakers list. So if you wish to take the floor, please do register that interest in the chat box and your name and affiliation will be taken down. If you do not have time on this occasion to make an intervention, there will be 3 more dialogues, as I mentioned, and we do have for each of these roundtable discussions a discussion space that you can contribute to, and again the details will be made available in the chat function online. These are my opening comments. I wish everyone the most productive 90 minutes ahead, and with that I will pass the floor over to one of your co-moderators for today, Michelle Layton, the Director of the Labour Migration branch of the International Labour Organization and an integral member of the Network on Migration. Michelle, please, the floor is yours. Michelle?
Hi, Jonathan, this is Katie. It seems that Michelle is struggling to join. She's just restarting it. So I think if you can just maybe move forward, and she should be there in a second.
Okay, so we will move forward. There is always an interesting moment in these virtual days of ours. What I would like to do, if you can just give me one moment, please, is to hand over, if I may, to David Kudur, who is the other co-moderator. David is the Senior Human Mobility Advisor with UNDP. David.
Thanks, Jonathan, and welcome colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm sorry. Please tell me if Michelle connects and if she's willing to talk. In any case,
we seem to have Michelle now, David.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
thank you, colleagues. Very sorry about the challenging difficulties this morning.
Go ahead, Michelle. The floor is yours. You are on mute, Michelle.
Apologies, I think I've worked out the technical difficulty now. Thank you very much. I assume Jonathan's already started, so apologies again for the delay. But let me thank everyone for joining us in today's dialogue. As we meet today, we're entering the third year of an unprecedented global pandemic, which we know has impacted the lives and livelihoods of people around the world and has affected those in the most vulnerable situations, such as men and women migrant workers and their families. In this setting, the Global Compact is a central means to upholding our moral responsibility to these families and our broader social contract with society. The ILO's data that some of you may have seen published this week reveal a stark picture. The gains of past years in decent work have pretty much been reversed, and another 52 million jobs have been lost. If our recovery is to be socially just, we must include the protection of migrant workers and their families. Now, the objectives of the Global Compact under review today form the backbone of this imperative. They aim to make migration a positive force for sustainable development through governance that's rights-based and across the migration cycle, from pre-departure to fair recruitment, regular pathways and skills recognition, to decent working conditions and destination. Objective 2 seeks to ensure that migration is a choice and recommits us to the goals of sustainable development and addressing the drivers, such as climate change, through mitigation and adaptation. Objective 5 highlights the importance of regular pathways for migration based on human and labor rights. Objective 6 emphasizes the importance of labor migration governance based on international labor standards and to ensure fair recruitment and decent work for all migrant workers. Objective 12 calls for guaranteeing transparent migration reception processes, ensuring access to services to fulfill migrants' rights. And finally, Objective 18 promotes the recognition and development of skills for the benefit of migrants and communities alike. Now, as highlighted in the draft background note for this dialogue, progress has been mixed. Some states and stakeholders have succeeded in tackling the adverse drivers of migration and promoting more regular migration channels that support compliance with international standards. And a number of countries adopted measures during the pandemic that have helped to ensure that migrant workers did not become irregular, or if their jobs were lost, they could seek employment with business and other sectors of the economy. Trade unions and other stakeholders provided vital support in basic services, and including the pursuit of claims for unpaid wages and exploitation. But the pandemic more often has exposed the significant gaps that remain. Migrant workers are left vulnerable to exploitation, at risk of COVID exposure, and without support. Regular pathways remain out of reach for too many and do not protect migrant rights in all cases. And a particular gap remains for those forced to leave due to climate change. Migrant workers suffered increased levels of discrimination, poor wages and working conditions, including because their rights went unprotected and their skills unrecognized or underutilized. And despite the Compact's guiding principles and commitment to a whole of society approach, we saw the engagement of stakeholders, including the social partners and social dialogue in migration policy, remains quite limited. So today's discussion is really an opportunity for us to review the gaps, but also to exchange on what initiatives work and which initiatives can improve our implementation of the objectives. How can we better accomplish these goals as we move to the IMRF itself? So I'm delighted that we have such a diverse group of experts to start us off with their perspectives and experience. And we hope that they can provoke a robust discussion and your participation in this dialogue. Perhaps we might even hear of what pledges you think could help us meet these goals and deliver on our responsibilities. Now, the discussion today will have two panels, and each will be followed by participant interventions. The speakers list is already developing. But now let me hand over moderation of the first session, so we don't lose too much time, to my distinguished colleague, David Kudur. David, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome all the colleagues. I see we have already 433 participants, so that's very impressive. So thanks, Michelle, for your very clear presentation of the challenges we are facing in the framework of this roundtable, and for clarifying the purpose and targets of this meeting. In this session, we are going to focus on some specific objectives with committed speakers that will present their experience from their regions. I would like to remind to the speakers that each of them, you will have 5 minutes, and then we will open the floor to interventions from the audience, and hopefully limit your interventions to 2 or maximum 3 minutes. We are now going to reflect on the drivers that lead irregular migration and forced displacement, with a specific focus on the effects of climate change. And we will hear about the value and practical impact of opening pathways for regular migration, and in particular with a sustainable development and SDG angle. So we have today 3 panelists to start the first part of this roundtable, and I am glad to call on Marta Foresti. Most of you already know her. She's the executive director of the Overseas Development Institute, ODI, in the United Kingdom. And Marta, could you please tell us what is the role of migration and migrants in moving forward towards a more sustainable world? How do you think we can use the Global Compact, but also what is missing in the Global Compact that you would like to highlight, and how can we connect better the national and the local level? So Marta, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Michelle, Jonathan, Katie. It's nice to be back. It feels like being back in a conversation about a global compact, which I was involved with, like many of you, in its lead up to the formulation and the approval of the global compact, perhaps a bit less so in the last couple of years in terms of implementation. And so what I bring to you today, I thought, are my thoughts on what we've got with the global compact, but as we move rapidly towards the IMRF, to think about not so much what's missing from the compact, but rather the opportunities that we shouldn't miss to make sure that around the compact we involve the right people, and we talk about and we bring to the table the agendas in ways that we can actually make a difference with the process of implementation itself. Obviously, the process leading up to the GCM focused so much on what should get into the text. Now we're in the business of what we can do in practice that can be inspired by the text and bring it to life. So I'm going to say a couple of things about adverse drivers and on legal pathways, and in particular how all this comes together into one of the pillars of the Global Compact, which was how migration can support sustainable development and interact with the realities of sustainable development. So what I would like to say about adverse drivers touches both on climate and on the notion of development. First, on climate, I think it's fair to say that both in the text of the Global Compact and in much of the thinking and voices that we heard also in the lead up, for example, to COP26, there is obviously a very live debate about climate as an adverse driver of irregular or migration or forced displacement, or migration that in many ways is not voluntary and risks making a lot of people vulnerable in the future. And I think one of the most interesting things I picked up in the conversation around COP was the fact that while that conversation matters and is also rightly in many ways used as a lever to reinforce the message of the urgency of the climate crisis, there are a couple of risks of things that we risk overlooking or not paying sufficient attention to, which I think is paramount that we pick up in the IMRF and in the broader conversation about the Global Compact implementation. The first is that, of course, people are already moving in, not as a result or of climate change, and therefore the whole debate about the role of migration as an adaptation strategy, of which COP did actually pay some attention to, and a lot of thinking, a lot of research is done, including in the loss and damage negotiations, and the importance of paying attention to the needs of people who are already on the move and are affected by climate and other phenomena, conflict, poverty, and others. But perhaps the one I really want to bring your attention to, and is something that I discussed with David and others, and some of you know is really close to my heart, and is something that at ODI we're trying to work on, which is to try not to repeat the mistake that we have made in the development community by overlooking the potential of migration as a driver of sustainable development and as an engine for sustainable development. And so now to talk about the potential of human mobility, and particularly labor mobility, to support and contribute the green and low carbon transition, and particularly in all the debate that there is on skills partnerships, on creating opportunities for economic transformation and new jobs, that we think about the green and just transition as a key component, and how people moving can actually make a contribution to it. This is a little bit overlooked in the climate debate because other things come across as more urgent and more politically higher on the political agenda. But I think, and there is, I think only this week, IOM UK is working with colleagues on CGD on a roundtable on this. We have done work, more will come in the way of case studies, but it's really a plea to not make the usual mistake and to put migration and labor mobility at the heart of what can help the green transition, and not once again relegate issues of forced displacement and migration as unfortunate consequence of climate change. The second, which is related to this, my second point relates to more broadly sustainable development. This is something I said before. The Global Compact tries to do two things at once. On the one hand, it says that migration should contribute to sustainable development. On the other hand, it says lack of development is an adverse driver of migration. Obviously, like most things in life, both things can be true, but the latter tends to dominate the political discourse, and particularly then leads to discussions about using aid to stem irregular migration, other matters. We've got to go back to the original idea that migration, the fact that people move can help achieve the sustainable development goals. And this is something where there is plenty of evidence. We've all done work. We need to make sure that in the lead up to IMRF, when we talk about development, we talk about how migration and mobility can help achieve development, and how overlooking that is actually undermining the achievement of the SDGs. My third and last point, because I've got 5 minutes and I'll come back if you want more on any of this, is that obviously the Global Compact is a matter of member states. It's been negotiated by member states, and we all know that migration policy is a key priority of nation states to negotiate and agree on. The risk here is that we overlook the places where people move to and they move from. And some of you know, in the last few years, along with others, I've worked a lot with cities, and I worked a lot on the reality of the fact that so many people, so many migrants move from and to cities. So many cities are growing rapidly as a result of people moving and migration. And focusing on the implementation of the Global Compact as a matter of progress of member states risks overlooking the potential of cities and local administrators in making a contribution to deliver on the Global Compact. And here there is one really important thing to try to do, which is obviously is not for cities, is not for mayors to set migration policies, but it is for cities and for mayors to work out access to housing, waste management, job creation at the local level, delivering again on the green transition. All of that interacts with the fact that people move to cities. People moving to cities create challenges and opportunities in that space. So to really bring the voices of cities, both to the official, to the process and the procedures of the IMRF. I know there is an open conversation about making sure that mayors are represented and have a voice and have a role to play and are part of the delegation to the IMRF. But beyond and over and beyond, which is very important, representations of cities and mayors is to really bring the reality of local economic development to the center of how in practice we will deliver on the Global Compact, and bringing the voices of local governments, cities and mayors to the table will be fundamental to offer a whole space for solution of things that can actually be done at the local level to accommodate the reality that people move to cities over and beyond decisions or policies that exist at national level to manage borders and migration flow. I think that's more or less 5 minutes. So I hope these are very concrete recommendations in the lead up to the IMRF, I hope.
Thanks so much, Marta. I fully agree with you that the discussion on addressing the the adverse drivers of migration shouldn't bring us to forget that migration is a key enabler of sustainable development. I would like now to call on Pefi Kingi, who is joining us from the Pacific region, from New Zealand. I'm not sure, I want to know what time it is in your part of the world. Pefi, what are your recommendations about how we should better address the drivers of migration, and especially those induced by environmental degradation and climate change impacts? Pefi, over to you.
Distinguished leaders, thank you for this opportunity, and how wonderful to see you all on the screen, and Happy New Year. For the Pacific region, we have had many Pacific civil society consultations, especially pertinent to the 2050 Pacific Regional Strategy. And at this time, we remember blessings for the Kingdom of Tonga in their time of crisis. I also duly acknowledge the Pacific Civil Society, the Migrant Forum for Asia, the Climate Migration and Displacement Platform, and the 12 Key Waves paper produced by the Global Action Committee, coordinated by the International Catholic Migration Commission. Our Pacific Climate Migration Agenda is fortunate for the leadership and the support of amazing leaders from around the globe as we face this particular agenda and dilemma. And so, I would also note that for the objectives 2 and 5, this paper is the product of village efforts and village thinking. So thank you to the wider global village for contributing to this paper. And in particular, for those who are experiencing climate change and climate mobility affecting many villages in the Pacific, as you well know, especially regions experienced by those who are compelled to leave their mother countries due to sudden onset natural disasters and other precarious situations as noted, and those leaving due to slow onset natural disasters. And so the adverse effects will take a lot more villages. So if it's one word that I wish to share, it is more, and yet more. We have yet to do more for this particular agenda. For the objectives and focus, we endorse investing more in resilient adaptive strategies to reduce risks of displacement and distress migration in reaction to the particular challenges that are upon us, enabling people to stay as well as helping them when they choose to or are forced to leave, developing and implementing improved protection, support and assistance for all who are compelled to or who choose to move and in the face of such adverse impacts. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thus far, we do not have as yet very good, well-planned relocation and resettlement packages. So we would really count on those pledges coming in from state countries to assist so that the destination countries of choice of peoples who have to migrate are indeed behind and are supportive of those who are most impacted. We support that creating new flexible rights respecting and regular pathways for international migration within and beyond the region that are adequate and the magnitude of the environmental impacts are taken into consideration. That has not as yet fully been implemented. In all policies, ensuring particular focus on Indigenous rights for those who are affected and contained within the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. That has not cropped up as yet. That's a huge gap. Vulnerable groups, of course, are those noted: elderly, disabled, children, youths, women, rural, non-literate, LGBTQ, and others. Acknowledging that there are already impacts beyond adaptation and that displacement and distressed migration inherently involves lost damages needs to be further thought through, and both non-economic as well as economic impacts, including sovereignty issues, statelessness. We have not yet given that much thought nor much room for dialogue. Cultural impacts, Indigenous knowledges, heritage, traditions, languages, the loss of environmental damage, the destructive biodiversity and ecological habitats, as we well know, economic impacts, the damaged crops, the destroyed homes, the weakened infrastructures, and devastated economies and countries. Our Global Civil Society Action Committee leaders actually took a solutions-based approach and jointly identified our key priorities, which include developing adequately, investing in adaptation and resilience strategies to reduce those risks of displacement and distress in migration and in the face of the onset, and as well as all other sea level rising impacts, developing and strengthening existing national and regional practices for transit admission and stay of appropriate duration based on compassionate humanitarian or other considerations for migrants compelled to leave their countries of origin. We have not yet seen some really robust development even of the visas that should be developed to actually allow for relocation and other visa options. So that would be most welcomed. In summary, at all international, regional, sub-regional, national and village meetings, Pacific peoples have expressed their links to lands and oceans and their need to remain in their ancestral lands. You already know this. However, where this cannot happen, we still need to develop better mechanisms that monitor and anticipate risks and threats that compel migration movements and climate mobility. We will indeed need more investment in human capital development, innovative technologies, and strengthened collaborations between our development actors. Our prayers for our Pacific families and friends experiencing current climate changes. And it's also a clear reminder of how underdevelopment can indeed fuel desperation, as you well know, and deteriorate environments, including turbulent political, socioeconomic, and environmental conditions. And that has compelled many of our Pacific families to move in order to survive. We also stand behind the many asks of our Pacific countries and representatives who attended Glasgow last year, and we're grateful to our allies and supporters and the anticipated strategies and initiatives for sustaining developments in our Pacific region. To you all, mahalo, we thank you. Over.
Thanks, Befi. A real, very good intervention and lots of food for thought. Our final presenter now, before we hear interventions from the floor, is Vice-Ministro Andrés Uribe, who is the Deputy Minister of Employment and Pensions of the Ministry of Labor, the government of Colombia. We can say that Colombia today is a model in terms of migrants' socioeconomic integration, with the regularization of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan irregular migrants, and also a clear strategy on inclusion into the labor market. So, Vice-Ministro, can you please tell us more about Colombia's experience? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, David. It's great to see you again, even if remotely. And thank you, Jonathan, Michelle, and hello to everyone. I want to thank our friends at the United Nations and ILO for this opportunity to share our experience. I'd like to start by mentioning that Colombia was not prepared to deal with the migration flow from Venezuela. However, to provide a comprehensive response and under the message of solidarity from President Iván Duque, the government has made adjustments in different aspects, seeking the social and labor integration of the migrant population. With the support from the UN, from the United Nations Development Program, we created a national income strategy for the Venezuelan population, and it was the basis for the implementation of the regional strategy in Latin America in the framework of the Quito process. So one of the main obstacles for the integration of the refugee and migrant population from Venezuela is the issue of the migratory regularization. Initially, we from the Ministry of Labor, we issued 20,000 temporary work permits addressed exclusively to informal workers for them to access formality with the sole requirement of a job offer. That's all they needed to have a permit to work in the formal market. Then in 2021, last year, through a presidential decree, the government created the temporary protection statute for Venezuelans. It seeks to provide temporary protection to the Venezuelan migrants and allow for the regularization and to integrate all efforts that we were making from all entities in the government. This includes access to the institutional offer in terms of health, education, work, and childcare. This will lead to the regularization of over 1.7 million Venezuelans who are in Colombia and will provide stability to them. So far, more than 450,000 permits have been approved. A little bit above 60,000 have been actually delivered, but obviously our goal is to reach 1.7 million Venezuelans in the very short term. As of today, migrants have increasing possibilities in our formal labor market. There are more than 95,000 Venezuelans who are already contributing to our general social security system. Our efforts include swift access for migrants to the services of the Public Employment Service. They can register their CV and receive guidance to craft their employment profile and to find vacancies that are available. Our data says that so far about 17,000 Venezuelans have found a job through our Public Employment Service. Migrants also have access to the skill certification programs that we have in the government. And in addition to this, we are working on a pilot for a skill certification programs that has the additional feature that it awards beneficiaries economic support for transportation, childcare, food, as this population often cannot afford to spend time in a certification process as they are struggling to generate some income to survive. In 2021, in our first pilot, more than 2,000 people were certified in over 20 competency standards. There were Colombian nationals and also about 1,000 Venezuelan migrants that were benefited by this program. Last thing I'd like to mention, in alliance with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, we are implementing a national labor mobility pilot. It is aimed at the integration of the Venezuelan population, moving them from highly concentrated areas in the border with Venezuela to other business centers in the country with greater potential to absorb labor. It is a small pilot. It shows great promise. So far, 30 families have been relocated, but this shows big promise to be scaled up. I'd like to mention a couple challenges we have going forward. We have to keep working to eliminate the myths associated with migration. In particular, we have to continue teaching people that it is just as easy to hire a migrant as it is to hire a Colombian national. Migrants deserve the opportunity to access the formal labor market. Another challenge I would say is that this, and we have to keep working on this, is to allow migrants to access the financial system. And I was asked before to give a couple recommendations. I think one recommendation I can give is that we have always to complement the actions undertaken to help migrants with benefits addressed to the host population in order to prevent outbreaks of xenophobia. So the host population must feel included in these processes. I hope I didn't abuse my time. And again, David, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Andres. As you know, I have been personally very involved in this process, and UNDP too, so it's good to see how much Colombia has achieved in terms of socioeconomic integration and all the progress you have made in this area. So thanks for sharing, and thanks to our three panelists for their contributions. I would like now to open the floor for intervention from the public. We have many participants, hundreds of you. So of course, we cannot open the floor to everybody, but you are very welcome to write statements in the chat or add them in the discussion space in the network web pages, or share with the network Secretariat colleagues by email. I would like to remind the participants from the floor that please limit your interventions no more than 3 minutes, and so that we can have as many participants as possible. And we have some participants who already registered their interest to speak. And so we will start with Her Excellency Sarah Lu Ariola, who is Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs in the Philippines. So over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Excellencies, partners in migration, good evening from Manila. The Philippines is honored to be part of today's dialogue. It is with great pride that I announce to you a monumental milestone for the GCM implementation in the Philippines, the enactment of the Department of Migrant Workers Act, which takes effect on February of this year. This is the first law in the world that codifies the progressive realization of the 23 objectives of the GCM. This will create a new government agency, consolidating existing key offices with migration-related functions into a single streamlined entity. The law likewise defines ethical recruitment that enhances the protection of the Filipino migrant workers. Given our mandate to protect over 10 million Filipino migrants, the Philippines, as primarily a country of origin, believes in the paramount importance of objectives 5 and 6 of the GCM, most especially now during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the Philippines, since the beginning of the pandemic, has facilitated the repatriation of almost 2 million overseas Filipinos and has anchored its COVID response in 5 Rs: relief, repatriation, recovery, return, and reintegration. A significant response of the Philippine government is the establishment of the Green Lane policy for seafarers, which allows crew change in ports while minimizing the risk of COVID-19. Acknowledging that 80% of global trade is moved by maritime transport, seafarers are essential workers with a critical role in the global economic recovery, and the Philippines has the largest number of seafarers serving the world's merchant and cruise fleets. They are among the Philippines' efforts to improve its pathways for migration amidst the pandemic. Ensuring access to decent work and human rights are primarily the Philippines' campaign throughout its GCM journey. Reforming the kafala system in the Middle East has become our battle cry. It echoes our call for fair and ethical recruitment and labor mobility, particularly in the Middle East, where there are more than 2.4 million Filipino migrant workers. The Philippines has since developed robust partnerships with the Gulf Cooperation Council countries of destinations such as Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. When Bahrain, for example, introduced its flexi visa system, allowing its irregular migrant workers to be freelance and not to have their visas tied to a specific employer, the Philippines invested at least $1.5 million to purchase flexi visas for 1,075 Filipino migrant workers. The Philippines is probably the only country that spent government funds to regularize its citizens. This was a concrete product of Objective 5 of the GCM. Ultimately, the wave of labor governance reforms currently sweeping in the Middle East are positive developments that the Philippines look forward to in upholding rights and interests of migrants. The Philippines has also signed over 50 bilateral labor agreements and 5 regional agreements. The bilateral agreements include general deployment and protection of domestic workers, government-to-government arrangements for recruitment and deployment of caregivers and hotel workers, and deployment via private recruitment agencies. On the other hand, regional and multilateral agreements were those with the ASEAN, Europe, Canada, and the UN. The Philippines shall continue to strive for the same level of dynamism and synergies among ourselves for the best interests of migrants to be reflected during the IMRF and beyond. Thank you very much. Over to you, David.
Thanks so much for this clear and straightforward intervention. I would like to give the floor now to Mrs. Genevieve Gencianos from the Public Services International. Over to you, Genevieve.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of Public Services International, the Global Union Federation representing 30 million public service workers worldwide. And also we belong to the Council of Global Unions, which is the biggest confederation of all the trade union movement. I am framing my contribution today on the framework of the 3 biggest interplay of 3 crises, and I will be addressing Objectives 2, Objective 5, and Objective 6. And these crises that I'm referring to are the triple Cs, as some of you already know. It's conflicts, climate crisis, and COVID. At the same time, while the impact of the COVID-19 continues to unfold, forced displacement has also continued to rise. And we've seen the data on this with 82.4 million forcibly displaced worldwide. And in 2020 alone, 30.7 million people were displaced by disasters, of which more than 98% were weather-related. And these record-breaking temperatures have caused also to a lot of droughts and desertification and leaving farmers without farmlands to till communities with no livelihoods. And environmental degradation from climate change is fueling more conflicts and violence and causing more people to flee for safety. The climate crisis combined with this interlink with conflicts and the COVID pandemic, as I again reiterate, are the major drivers of forced migration today, and we acknowledge that. And we know as well that these triple Cs, COVID, climate, and the climate crisis and conflicts are also leading to more hardships for these already vulnerable populations, such as migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons, as they continue to struggle with access to jobs, social protection, public services, and vaccination. It is therefore very important as we approach these, the challenges of addressing the GCM objectives, that we understand climate migration and its complex interlinkages with the social, political, and economic factors, including in this COVID-19 pandemic. And therefore, what we're doing as PSI and the trade union movement is really to take up the challenges that should be centered, that should be people-centered, gender responsive, and rooted on sustainable development. And this is the core of our strategy as PSI. These are the 3 key points that we are offering. We're fighting for climate justice, for human rights, and for the defense of quality public services. First, on climate justice, we demand equity and justice in addressing this climate crisis, to hold rich countries accountable for the greenhouse gas emissions that we are dealing with today, for which the poor, especially the more marginalized, vulnerable peoples who cannot migrate, who cannot move, are the ones suffering the most. And we must fight to ensure a just and equitable transition for workers affected by loss and damage from climate change and the move to low carbon energy production and other climate change response measures. Second, we advocate—
Genevieve, can you accelerate? We are running short of time.
Yes, and try my best. So I'm addressing these key drivers. And what is important for us as we move forward is to respect the human rights for all, above all else. And we need to be able to recognize this complexity, as I reiterated, and that as trade unions, we have to uphold the normative framework on the rights-based approach, and we continue to fight and campaign actively for the ratification of the UN Migrant Workers Conventions, as well as the ILO Migrant Workers Conventions, and the respect to labor standards. Because we believe that no matter who you are, migrant, refugees, IDPs, you have the right to your human rights and decent work, and that regular pathways must be available and social protections must be covering everyone. And the third point that we would like to reiterate is the defense of quality and inclusive public services. For while we acknowledge the positive contribution of migration, we must not also overlook either that migration is not the core strategy to mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis, to COVID and conflicts, that we should have the enabling environments, we should have public services that are available on the ground to ensure that people are not forced to move, that they have a choice to stay, and to ensure that if ever they are displaced or uprooted, that their human rights are protected and they have access to basic services for everyone, for host communities, migrants, refugees, and IDPs. And the second point that I would just—
Thanks, Genevieve. I'm sorry, we have a long list of speakers, and I would like to give the floor to the other panel, to the other participants. Sorry about that.
Yes, thank you very much. And we're happy to submit our full intervention in writing, and also to speak about what is happening on migrant health and care workers in the impact of the pandemic, on what our unions are doing in defending their rights to decent work, and ensuring that we avoid more deaths, because we know that 180,000 health workers have died in this pandemic, of which 36,000 are migrant health and care workers, and a majority—
Thanks, Genevieve. Really, we have to move to other speakers.
Thank you very much. And other colleagues will add to the—
Sorry, we have a long list of participants and people who want to talk. So please, can you limit your interventions to 2 minutes maximum? And I would like to give the floor now to Baki Bilal from the permanent mission of Bangladesh. So over to you, and please 2 minutes max.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the floor. The drivers of involuntary migration are varied, sometimes defined by the local context and challenges. Climate change has emerged as a serious concern of large-scale displacement and forced migration across regions. As a climate vulnerable nation, we emphasize that the Roundtable will hold a strong voice for the strengthened global climate actions, focusing on the loss and damage issue. As an origin country, Bangladesh has developed several mechanisms for promoting fair and ethical recruitment. We have set up the government's monitoring mechanism up to the local levels. We have also introduced the recruitment of migrant workers through government mechanisms. These have significantly reduced migration cost. We have established government-to-government bilateral channels with some destination countries, which has improved the situations of ethical recruitment and decent work. This has been a priority in our bilateral labor agreements. The complexity and uncertainty throughout the migration cycle often minimize the safeguard conditions and decent work provisions in the destination countries. The GCM has stipulated some practical ways to ensure decent work for migrant workers. However, due to several drawbacks, including lack of effective monitoring mechanisms, in many destination countries, progress is slow. The COVID-19 has exposed the severity of prevailing livelihood insecurity of migrant workers, particularly those in informal sectors. We emphasize that the Roundtable would appropriately bring this into the discussions of the forum. As a migrant sending country, Bangladesh attaches high importance to the skill development of migrant workers. We have undertaken different skilling and upskilling training programs in this direction. In the context of international migration, mutual recognition of skills, qualifications, and competencies is an important contributing factor for facilitating pathways for regular migration and ensuring decent work. However, this is yet to be widely established. Bilateral and regional partnerships would be an important, effective way to ensure such recognitions. The forum might further mobilize such cooperation. The GCM has stipulated several pathways for enhancing regular migration. However, existing and new challenges are impeding the progress in those avenues. The prevailing politics of fear concerning international migration is increasingly shaping the migration narratives in many parts of the world, undermining the significant contribution of migrants, in particular labor migrants, to sustainable development. COVID-19 has aggravated the situation. It has exposed some new challenges that are not foreseen while we negotiated the GCM. Bangladesh would like to say that the Roundtable reflects the particular challenges of migrant workers posed by the pandemic and guide the global leaders for the appropriate inclusion of migrants in the recovery process and beyond, through greater focus on a holistic GCM implementation. In every way, migrants' rights and protection should be at the center of the discussions. I thank you.
Thanks so much, and apologies for the translators. I think it's very challenging to translate all of this so quickly. So thanks for all your support. I would like to give the floor now to Fiji with Anare Levinikila. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the floor. Fiji would like to take this opportunity just to highlight the work that we are facing in terms of looking at climate change and the mobility nexus, including labor mobility, and the need to implement evidence-based actions to promote climate resilience in the region. We would also like to just to highlight, as a community of practice, we need to continue growing the body of knowledge to enhance our understanding around the drivers, actions that are relevant for achieving broad-based sustainable development. And this is an issue that requires increased global attention because this is a reality for us in the Pacific. One of the things that will be highlighted is the multi-migration, multi-partner trust fund priority pipeline proposal titled Labor Mobility for Sustainable Development and Climate Resilience in the Pacific. You know, this project provides tangible example on how this work can be strengthened. And this proposal is consistent with the objectives of the IMRF in examining drivers and sustainable solutions to help states better integrate labor mobility issues in national policies and legal frameworks. For Pacific small island states, developing states, such proposal is vital when we look at providing evidence-based policy guidance to promote sustainable development impacts on labor mobility and how to leverage labor mobility as an avenue for contributing to climate resilience. Therefore, it is important for governments and development partners to support programs which magnify the positive developments, which impacts labor mobility and extend the possibility for labor mobility to be aligned with climate resilience effort. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your intervention. I would like to give the floor now to Fernando de la Mora from Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor moderador. Gracias a la red por organizar esta mesa. Comienzo con el objetivo 2, en donde destacamos que estamos trabajando de manera conjunta con El Salvador, Guatemala y Honduras en el Plan de Desarrollo Integral de la mano con la CEPAL. Sus objetivos incluyen impulsar iniciativas para mejorar el desempeño económico y atraer la inversión principalmente en territorios más propensos a movimientos migratorios. Asimismo, buscamos garantizar la atención, protección, seguridad y dignidad de las personas en todo el ciclo migratorio. En este contexto tenemos que reconocer que existen desafíos como la presencia de la delincuencia organizada transnacional y los volúmenes de los flujos migratorios. Sin embargo, estamos convencidos de que la migración debe de ser una opción, no una necesidad, y la cooperación internacional es la mejor vía para ello. En el objetivo 5, relacionado con la disponibilidad y flexibilidad de las vías de migración, compartirles que hemos ampliado el listado de países beneficiarios de la tarjeta de visitante regional y de enero a noviembre de 2021 expedimos 58,899 tarjetas con duración de 5 años. A pesar de que hemos realizado muchos esfuerzos para ampliar y flexibilizar las vías para la migración regular, persisten importantes desafíos. El principal es fomentar la cultura de regularidad para el ingreso de personas que diariamente cruzan la frontera sur mexicana, forman parte de su cotidianidad. Por eso México lanzará un programa piloto en 2022 para ofrecer alternativas migratorias a quienes recurren a la figura de refugio y no reúnen el perfil. Nos da gusto compartir respecto al objetivo 6 que contamos con programas bilaterales con Canadá, Estados Unidos y Alemania, en los que el Servicio Nacional de Empleo recluta y selecciona a personas desempleadas o subempleadas con experiencia laboral requerida por el empleador en ocupaciones ofertadas. Al cierre de 2021 eran más de 3,700 trabajadores vinculados a este modelo de migración segura, ordenada y regular. Finalmente, respecto al objetivo 18, comentarles que el Consejo Nacional de Normalización y Certificación de Competencias otorga la certificación de habilidades para más de 1,400 estándares en los sectores de hotelería, manufactura, construcción, comercio, agricultura y servicios administrativos. Esto es importante para facilitar el acceso a mejores empleos formales y mejor remunerados para aquellos retornados después de una estancia fuera de México. Así que los objetivos que discutimos en esta mesa ponen de relieve que cada país tiene un rol importante desde una perspectiva de responsabilidades compartidas a lo largo del ciclo migratorio, y esperamos que el Foro de Examen de Migración Internacional nos permita a todos enseñar, aprender, dialogar y acelerar nuestras acciones en cumplimiento del Pacto y de la Agenda 2030. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Fernando. Gracias, Fernando, por compartir la experiencia de México. I would like to give the floor now to Luca Licci from the European External Action Service. The floor is yours. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and I hope that you can see me, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the work being done. The road to the IMRF, we consider this, it's really important to take stock of the progress done. The GCM is a positive international development. It's fully in line with the EU's approach to migration, and it's a key. And today our work is enshrined in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which, much like the GCM, adopts a comprehensive view of migration, recognizing that every dimension is interlinked with one another. The Pact recognizes the need to enhance international cooperation to manage migration. And this objective is also in line with the EU's development policy to make sure that migration is a necessity and not just a choice. In the new fund for our development cooperation, the Neighborhood Development International Cooperation Instrument Global Europe, about 10% of the funding will be dedicated to actions related to migration. And these will support our sustained cooperation with partners towards the Sustainable Development Goals, including through migration partnerships. And concerning the implementation of the GCM in third countries, the EU also supports the EU-UN partnerships for migration capacity building, providing a parallel funding to the system established by IOM and through which we support GCM champion countries. Within this external work, we recognize the urgent need to consider the complexity of and address adverse effects of climate change, which are exacerbating already dire situations. And on this, I wish to assure you that the EU is looking forward to assuming the chairmanship of the platform on disaster and displacement as of the 1st of July 2022. Now, when it comes to regular migration, we recognize that this has long become a normal trait of our societies. More than 3 million migrants come to the EU legally each year, contributing to its richness and diversity. That said, we're committed to improving EU rules in full respect of national competences of our member states. For instance, the EU revised its rules establishing conditions for highly qualified workers coming to live and work in the EU. The directive aims to simplify the process for migrants, further harmonizing rules across the EU, facilitating intra-EU mobility, family reunification, recognition of professional skills, and simplifying procedures for migrants. Also simplifying procedure for migrants, the Commission is working to enhance a single permit directive, which aims to ensure a simplified and unique procedure for applying for the right of work and reside in the EU. The Commission has also assessed the implementation of EU rules to protect irregular migrants from being exploited by employers, proposing a way forward to strengthen the implementation of the Employers' Sanctions Directive by focusing on sanctions against employers which abuse migrants in vulnerable, irregular migrants in vulnerable conditions, ensuring protection of rights and inspection. And to conclude, in June 2021, the EU launched the Talent Partnerships as a new tool to provide comprehensive policy and funding framework to better match skills and needs between the EU, its member states, and a number of targeted partner countries. These actions will foresee extensive training for aspiring migrant workers, which will help in addressing challenges relating to difficulties in skill recognition and across borders. We will also be happy to submit our contribution in writing, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the floor.
Thanks for your intervention. And now, like, before we move to the second session, and we will have more time for interaction also in the second part of the session, I want to give the floor now to Irene Biontino from Germany.
Thank you. David, Michelle, and Jonathan. I'll try to skip points which have already been made. This is also a valuable opportunity for Germany to listen to others. I would like to highlight a few points of particular importance from a German perspective. The value of regular migration and regular pathways and the fundamental need to address adverse drivers of vulnerable and irregular migration. We are looking forward to sharing our experiences with skills partnerships and the triple win potential of regular migration for sustainable development. The pandemic has underlined how vulnerable and unsustainable irregular migration is. But cooperation on regular pathways is something where we can all benefit. So we would like to use Roundtable 1 to take the most benefit out of this as possible. On drivers, we see two outstanding factors among others, and that is climate change and disasters on one hand, and gender equality as a crucial factor for prosperity, development, and resilience. The MPTF, the Migration Trust Fund, created by the GCM to foster UN cooperation in support of member states implementing the GCM, is supporting regular regional labor migration in the IGAT region in the framework of a project being implemented to avoid disaster displacement. It is important that Roundtable 1 uses the opportunity to move us forward on our way to more cooperation and partnership on the ground, also to avoid disaster displacement in the context of climate change. We speak very often about gender equality as if it was about getting a share in power, but gender equality and access of women and girls to education and professional life is not a zero-sum game. Women represent half of the human capital of any society and economy. This potential should be leveraged by every society to make sure that migration is a choice and not a necessity. Thank you.
Thanks for your intervention and for addressing the issue of gender, which is a very important one. The last intervention before we move to the, sorry. So I give the floor to Kylie Ober and from Refugees International, and apparently the Vice Minister Uribe wants to make a final statement. So then I give the floor to Michelle. Apologies, Michelle.
Thank you, David. I jumped the shark a little. Really lift up.
I don't know if it's just me, but I don't hear you, Kylie.
Sorry, it's my connection. Do you hear me now?
Very slow.
Apologies. I'll just go ahead and put my comments in the chat then.
Okay. Sorry about that. So if Vice Minister Uribe can make a very quick intervention and we move to the next session.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, I was asked if I wanted to say something else or not. Given the opportunity, thank you. I would like to say that it is necessary to promote international cooperation in the form of financial aid. More financial aid is needed, especially in cases where migrations have their origin in social crisis. And I want to address one question that I was browsing the chat. I saw one question about how to include the host population in the programs that are addressed to migrants. And one example I mentioned, it was the skills certification program, and it was very simple. We established a quota for migrants. A minimum of 30% of the beneficiaries have to be migrants. Obviously, in the whole population, migrants are less than 30%, so they are more than proportionally represented in this program. So not only beneficiaries notice that also the Colombian nationals can have benefits, but the people outside the program see that the government is addressing needs both for migrants and Colombian nationals. So that is a way for solidarity to flow in a more effective way. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. It's so important to include the host communities in our responses. So sorry to all of you who wanted to speak. We have a second session, so you have another round of possibilities to intervene. Thanks to the participants. Please, if you have time, stay with us. And I give the floor to Michelle Layton from ILO. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, David. Yes, we hope to be able to continue with the interpreters at least 15 minutes beyond the timing for those of you who are wondering. So we do hope. We have a lot of speakers on the list. But let me turn now to our second panel of experts who are key actors representing the world of work. And I'm really delighted that we have Mr. Joel Adigi, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation for Africa, Ms. Ronnie Goldberg, Senior Counsel for the U.S. Council for International Business, and Ms. Neha Misre, Senior Specialist of Solidarity Center. So let me turn to you, Joel, first and ask you, where do you see the priority actions for ensuring decent work for migrant workers? And how can trade unions better support this objective? Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Comrade Michel. And glad to see quite a number of friends and comrades here. First is to say that there are quite a number of places where there are opportunities to advance decent work, especially in the areas of recruitment procedures. But to note that already certain things have happened positively. The ILO general principles and operational guidelines for fair recruitment, we think these instruments have laid some groundwork to helping us drive very good work around recruitment possibilities that are more ethical. We have also seen quite a number of actions between non-state actors at the countries of origins and countries of destination working together, Africa, Asia, Africa, Middle East. And we think this can also get better in terms of how we better frame the narrative around a better ethical recruitment governance, especially that became obvious with COVID-19. And then that is for us as trade unions, the migrant recruitment advisor that we've thrown up as an opportunity to be able to put a tool in the hand of migrant workers to on themselves contribute to the advancement of ethical recruitment. Why is all these are there? There are still gaps, and this is where I'll focus quickly on your question. Where are the areas where we see opportunities? First, we see opportunities in terms of the room. There are still room for us to work more on improving standards. Migrants have rights. Labor migrants have got rights, and specifically, I speak about the right to freedom of association. The UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights is explicit on this. If we don't even want to go to ILO Convention 87 or 98, which are critically important for the process. When workers have the right to associate, to form unions, they are able to defend other rights. So we really want to talk more on standards and the need also for application, enforcement of these standards. Mitchell, there is opportunity for us to improve working together if we can see how we can improve monitoring of recruitment processes together. Government, employers, recruiters, and trade unions working together. We are excited on our own continent, for example, in Africa, where we have seen the African Union leading a process on developing developing a bilateral labor migration agreement, a guide for Africans, because until now, the BLMAs were ones without possibility or provisions for protecting the rights of migrants. But with this guide, I think that is something that can work. But beyond the guide, how do we effectively enter into an agreement that involves all stakeholders? Lastly, there is, sorry, not the last, there is also an opportunity for us with respect to the possibility of merging tools that exist. For instance, the MRA that I talked about, Migrant Resource Advisors, and the IRIS that IOM has they have developed. We are asking, shouldn't it be an opportunity for us to have a merger of these two tools, bring them together in a way where a tool that has good role for government and employers like the IRIS, and the MRA that has good role for migrants and trade unions, bring them together to function. I think by so doing, we will increase possibilities of more ethical recruitment going forward. There is also opportunity, especially internationally, again, within the Abu Dhabi dialogue space. The Abu Dhabi dialogue offers an opportunity clearly on labor migration governance. Can we work together to take stock of this process and then open it more for non-state actors? Can we insert tripartism into the ad process so that the ADD becomes something we can together use more going forward? If I still have a minute or two, I will speak on the need for us to check on better cohesion at the level.
Sorry, Joel, we are so rushed for time, but I really hope you can put more information perhaps into the chat. Since we only have 5 minutes per speaker, I'm really sorry if you can.
No, that's fine.
More information.
I will just share what I have on the chat with you, colleagues. Thank you.
That's perfect. And thanks for mentioning the Fair Recruitment Initiative and the recruitment issues. So I'd like now to turn to you, Ronnie, and ask you, how are employers supporting labor migration governance and ensuring migrant workers have the right skills they need to meet the future needs? Thanks, Ronnie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. And greetings to everybody from New York City. First of all, let me assure you of the importance the business community places on the issue of safe and orderly migration, and on the Global Compact in particular. Representatives of the business mechanism on migration that I'm representing here, I'm trying to get this to stop ringing, attended every one of the GCM negotiating sessions, and we were present in Marrakesh to join in the celebration of its adoption. We focused primarily on objectives 5, 6, and 18, not because the other objectives are less important, but because these are our wheelhouse. This is where we have our expertise and our interest on regular pathways, fair recruitment, and skills development and recognition. And we looked forward to being active and engaged participants along with our government, worker, and civil society colleagues in their implementation. That was 4 years ago. Sufficient time, one would have thought, for implementation efforts to take hold. However, as we all know only too well, a global pandemic has intervened, in many cases virtually ending labor and talent mobility. This has been a setback for the GCM, but in some ways it's made it more important than ever. One thing we've learned from the pandemic is the enduring nature of the need for mobility, the heightened demand for the physical presence of essential workers to fill gaps, the heightened need to identify, develop, and deploy talent. And with this in mind, I'd like to tell you very briefly what the business community has been advocating for each of our priority objectives. With regard to objective 5, regular pathways, businesses in every region are advocating for efficient recruitment, migration, and labor permit mechanisms. These processes must be transparent, user-friendly, cost-effective for both job seekers and employers, adhere to human rights standards, and meet business requirements. Digitalization, we've learned, helps greatly in this regard, and insufficient digitalization in many places has created costly bottlenecks. With regard to fair recruitment, objective 6, when appropriately regulated, private employment and recruitment services improve labor market functioning by matching job seekers to decent jobs. This point has gained added relevance during the pandemic as migrants hired through informal channels and operating in the informal economy have become even more safe and vulnerable. Our message to governments is that national laws and regulations should reflect fair recruitment policies and practices, and that the recruitment process should respect the laws and regulations, as well as the collective agreements of countries of origin, transit, and destination, while of course respecting relevant international labor standards as well. Finally, but by no means least, regarding skills, Objective 18. We hear more and more of a global skills shortage, due in large part to skills mismatch and insufficient development of the skills required to meet current, not to mention anticipated demand. The hiring of essential workers has been difficult, and cross-border remote working, all the more necessary because of delays in visa processing and pandemic restrictions, has proved to be challenging due to such issues, for example, as differing tax regimes. Addressing these skills and talent issues requires a whole of government approach and long-term planning with the participation of the business community, beginning with ensuring that education policies are fit for purpose and covering a wide range of other policies and issues. For example, skills recognition, lifelong learning. In each of these areas, business has experience, data, information, and resources to inform policy and insist in implementation. Implementing the best practices encompassing in each of these objectives would benefit not just our companies and their employees, but our societies and our economies. Business stands ready to play its part in reaching this goal, and we will continue to be active participants in this process. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ronnie, for those insights from the business community. And now I'd like to call on Ms. Neha Mesre, who has joined us. We had unfortunately not been able to have Mr. William Goes, but we're really delighted to have you, Neha. And could you tell us, please, how can we make regular pathways more accessible and more responsive to the rights of migrants in vulnerable situations?
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you to the ILO and UNDP for inviting me to fill in for William today on this crucial topic. And in particular, we're heartened by the ILO's leadership on these particular objectives of the Global Compact, as now more than ever, the ILO core labor standards, tripartite system, and emphasis on social dialogue is needed to promote fair migration. The Solidarity Center works closely with the Council of Global Unions and is a member of a number of coalitions, including the Women in Migration Network, the Global Coalition on Migration, and the Civil Society Action Committee. With these coalition partners and together with our hundreds of labor partners around the world, we are saying emphatically that it is time for coherence in migration governance. Regular pathways must be developed hand in hand with regularization of the undocumented, climate change responses, and humanitarian needs. The labor movement is calling for a new approach to migration that centers long-term regular pathways around the human rights of migrants, breaking down the artificial separation between refugees and asylum seekers on the one hand and migrants on the other. All people on the move have rights and should have regular pathways, regardless of the incoherent categories created by migration systems. In their efforts to promote regular pathways, states should focus on restoring and expanding humanitarian resettlement options, rather than misdirecting desperate migrants into flawed and abusive temporary labor migration programs. And decent work must be the driving principle for development, with an emphasis on the creation of decent work in origin countries so that migration is a choice and not an economic necessity, and ensuring that all regular pathways meet decent work criteria so that workers and their families that move across borders do so with full respect of their agency and humanity. The strategies enacted in response to the Global Compact must protect and empower workers in countries of origin, transit, and destination, and produce positive labor market outcomes for all working people, regardless of race, gender, or immigration status. In order to effectively integrate a worker rights lens into policy frameworks, workers need and expect a seat at the table as these policies are being developed and implemented. We've had enough of siloed, ineffective tweaks to an unjust migration system, and instead call for policy coherence that incorporates migration governance into broader economic, social, racial, and gender justice initiatives. The new social contract called for by the global labor movement is an excellent frame for this. We must recognize that a worker is a worker is a worker. All workers, regardless of their migration status, of whether they are in the informal or formal economy, whether they identify as male or female, whether they are Black or brown, whether they identify as asylum seekers or refugees, economic migrants, or a mix of all of the above, must be treated the same under the protection of labor laws. And in particular, we must move beyond the flawed language in the Global Compact and instead adhere to the ILO principle that all workers have the freedom of association, right to organize, and collectively bargain. Workers' agency to have a say in migration processes and their wages and working conditions must be recognized fully and without condition. States must put more emphasis on access to justice for mechanisms for all workers, including migrant workers, refugees who work, and asylum seekers, and the undocumented. Wage theft among migrants has always been a major problem, and it has become even more rampant during the pandemic. Fair wages are a fundamental part of the employment relationship, and we can no longer accept the practice of wage theft to be practiced with impunity. States must also ensure social protection for all migrants. We've been saying this for decades, and the global pandemic has proved more than enough evidence of why this is so crucial. In closing, states must eliminate the use of temporary, circular, sponsorship, or guest worker labor migration programs that systematically and structurally expose migrant workers to exploitation by recruiters, employers, and others. And temporary migration programs should not be used as a solution to labor shortages, humanitarian crisis, climate change, or irregular migration. Given that serious humanitarian concerns gave rise to the GCM, implementation strategies should prioritize regularization schemes and and rights-based channels, which allow migrants the freedom to move, settle, work, and fully participate in society over expanding temporary or circular migration programs. States should promote regular migration pathways that ensure full worker rights, facilitate social and family cohesion, and provide options for permanent residence and meaningful participation in civic life. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Neha, and thanks to all the panelists for these really cogent insights and your perspective. I have a very long list of speakers, and I'd like to begin moving to them. Let me just remind everyone, you'll hear a bell, I think you just heard it, or some indication. We really only have 2 minutes per speaker, and we are still going to go over time. Please, if you would, out of respect for the other speakers, keep your comments very brief. We really want to hear from you, so we also have the chat box available, any written intervention. All of this will be considered as we go forth and prepare for the IMRF and the background paper. So let me start with Ahmed Massoudi, the General Director of the Ministry of Labor of Tunisia. Sir, you have the floor. Do we have Tunisia? Perhaps there is a problem connecting. I'll let Tunisia discuss the technical issue with.
I am from UNHCR Tunisia, so I can hear you properly. So I don't know whether the minister is connected or not.
We can come back to the minister when he is connected, if you wish.
Okay, no problem, but he should have been. Thank you.
Yes, we don't see him. But please let us know, and we'll put him in the order. As soon as he jumps in, we'll have him speak.
Okay, I just meant to confirm that I can hear you properly from Tunisia. Maybe colleagues from IOM already liaised with the ministry, but no problem, I will follow up.
Yes, just let us know when he joins. Okay.
By all means. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have next on the list Apollinar Tolentino, the regional representative for Asia Pacific. Dong, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. I hope colleagues can hear me well. The Building and Woodworkers International, BWI, is part of the Council of Global Unions, representing more than 200 million workers worldwide. And we are also part of the other global coalition of civil society, among others, the People's Migration Challenge and the Civil Society Action Committee. And what I will articulate are position not just of the Council of Global Unions, but also of this coalition. We reinforce the centrality of decent work in the current discourse on GCM and its implementation of the objectives. Particularly, we call on the member states to work towards the creation of new social contract for migrant workers between governments, workers, and employers. These social contracts should include universal guarantee for all workers, regardless of nationality, sector or status, that all labor rights are to be respected and universally applied, particularly the freedom of association, the right to join unions and collective bargaining, and the right to strike. That jobs are decent, social protection is universal, due diligence and accountability are driving business operations, and that social dialogue ensures just transition, measures for climate change and technology. In the light of the current debate on having safety workplace as a fundamental workers' rights, we also call on participants in this dialogue to ensure that migrant workers have the right to safe workplaces, and occupational safety and health should be respected, again, regardless of the status or the sector that they work in. Thank you for the time, Michelle. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dong. And I appreciate you sticking to the time, 2 minutes. Thank you. And Sarah Lubsar, who is the High Commission of Migration of Portugal, we'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, all good.
Okay, thank you, dear colleagues. This is also a great opportunity for us to address some of the objectives that have been mentioned, in particular 5, 6, and 18, and also to take the opportunity to share some of the work that Portugal has been doing. We would like to first highlight that Portugal has recently signed a labor mobility agreement with India on September 13th, and this is intended to facilitate legal and safe labor migration flows between these two countries, also establishing procedures for admission of Indian citizens to work under an employment contract in Portugal. And this bilateral instrument will apply to the recruitment of workers for any work activity, and regardless of the duration of the employment contract, benefiting both Indian workers with all the rights guaranteed by Portuguese law as our own labor markets. This month, Portugal also with Morocco signed a labor agreement that aims to establish the procedures for admission of Moroccan citizens in Portugal to carry out a professional activity. The agreement is currently undergoing the constitutional proceeding of ratification in both countries. And Portugal has also been engaged in negotiations with other countries, also always safeguarding the principles set out under its commitments with the International Organization for Migration and the United Nations Global Compact. In December 2021, Portugal also ratified the labor mobility agreement of the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries that was signed in the ministerial summit of the organization in Luanda, Angola, on 17th July 2021. Apart from strengthening cooperation with other countries, Portugal also implements a range of measures at the national level to promote migrant labor integration and to facilitate the recognition of qualifications, skills, and competencies. And specifically and directly involved in the work of the Portuguese High Commission for Migration, we have national support centers for the integration of migrants that are one-stop shops intended to support with information, referral, advice, and mediation services that are provided to migrants in different languages and irrespective of their legal status and are free of charge. We have currently 4 of these centers located in 4 different cities across the country, where migrants have access to specialized ACM offices, including legal support, language learning, employment, and entrepreneurship. And in 2 of them, in Lisbon and in Porto, they can also find other government services, such as the Immigration and Border Services, the Social Security, Health, Education, as well as the Ministry of Justice and also Finance. We also have in these centers employment support offices that are more targeted to facilitating and supporting migrant integration in the labor market. They offer advice and liaise with other relevant entities in the domain of employment and training in Portugal, such as the Institute of Employment and Professional Training and also the Labor Inspection. I see that the BIP has gone, and this office also supports the promotion of migrant entrepreneurship. We are also available to share with you in other forum the other work that we've been doing. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ferreira. Very well received. I turn next to Winnie Karangiti, who's the director of the Ministry of Labor in Kenya. And after that, we will have Laxman Basnet, Canada, Sweden, Morocco, Ceylon, and several others. So please, if colleagues, you can keep your interventions very short. We hope to be able to go to at least 1/4 past. So thank you very much. Ms. Karangiti, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Sia. I think in Kenya, we are doing quite a lot. We are especially looking at the GCM Objective 6 on fair and ethical recruitment. And we have done some studies on in this, ensuring that all the recruitment agencies are taken through ID standards to ensure at least the practice ethical recruitment. The issue of also the BROA, we have also discovered that the BROA we had signed with the Gulf countries were not quite comprehensive. So we are currently reviewing the BROAs to ensure that is a terms and condition, to put the terms and condition of service, enhance protection of Kenyan migrant workers, and also increase the cadre of skilled and professional workers covered by the agreement. Because most of our BRA, like the one for Saudi Arabia, for just for the domestic workers. So we are enhancing this to ensure we also have the skilled labor. Also, the other issue I wanted also to bring out, we have been able to adopt the right-based model BRA guidelines, which have been developed with the support from ILO at the IGAD region. And we are actually reviewing all the existing BRA to ensure they are in line with the guidelines, to ensure that we afford the social protection for the workers. The other issue, which maybe I can talk about, it is ensuring we are also engaging the GCC countries to ensure that is they accord the workers how to the support required. So also ensuring that we sign a BRA with other countries where we are not actually signed the BRA. But we are saying it's quite a task because of the issues which are coming in the GCC countries to ensure at least we have ethical recruitment. And towards this, we have also come up with Kenya is chairing the regional forum where we have got 11 countries participating in Africa to ensure that we harmonize the labor policies, the labor migration policies, to ensure at least we speak as in one voice as we approach the GCC countries. We can be able to ensure we have a common understanding. I think these are the issues maybe I wanted to bring out as of now.
Thank you so much for those interventions. I now am turning to Laxman Basnet, General Secretary of the South Asian Trade Union Network. And thank you, Laxman. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very
and
much.
Good to have you.
Thank you very much, Madam Michelle. I have only 1 minute to speak. This is GCM is a concern of United Nations. It's a mother of mother of all the negotiations in the world in favor of workers. It should be in favor of workers. One thing, this is a pretext. The other thing is the government does the negotiation between two countries for the migrant workers. So migrant workers have no say in this, the whole scenario. My request to you is the negotiation for the work conditions should be done between the workers and the employers, not between two governments. If it is done between the two governments, then the government has the moral obligation